getting ready to host the fuel cell webinar series, Steps to Securing Low and No Emissions Grants and Funding. It's the last of our webinar series. We posted 2 other webinar series that you can visit on YouTube, and we'll send out the links after the presentation today so that newcomers or people that want to revisit those webinars can see them. We've got a lineup of great panelists here to help walk you through the fuel cell electric bus journey. We're still registering. Some registrants are coming in here now, but I'm Kim Leach. I'm the Market Development Manager for Ballard Power Systems. I'm going to moderate the session today and do the introductions and walk everybody through the initial stages of thinking about a fuel cell electric bus project, and introduce you to Sydney Krueger, who is the president of Krueger Transit Consulting and the sales rep for Ballard in the US. She's going to talk to everybody about applying for low and no grants in fuel cell electric buses. And we've got Jim Gee, Director of Public Transit and Operations. He's the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County. And great grant funding success and great grant funding success for RTC Reno. And lastly, we've got Tim Sasseen, Market Development Director for Ballard. He's going to be talking about fuel cell funding and consulting and information resources. There's a lot of resources out there for fuel cell electric bus deployments, so make sure you stay on the webinar for that. During the webinar, we encourage everybody to please populate those question and answers. We're going to try and answer some live, but if we don't, we are going to respond to you within a week with those answers. If we have the right answers, we're going to answer them. If not, we're going to defer some of those answers and get the answers, and we'll make sure that we reach out to you if we have your contact. So we're excited to host the last of the webinar series today, and it's on fuel cell electric bus, the low and no application, and we're going to walk you through it. I'm Kim Leach. I'm the Market Development Manager for Ballard Power Systems, and I think we're ready to start. We're at the top of the hour, so if we can go to the next slide. So Ballard by the numbers, who is Ballard? Ballard Power Systems has been around for over 44 years. We have over 1,100 employees, 4 production sites with a global footprint that's growing as well to meet today's demands. We've got 1,100 patents and applications, 1.6 gigawatt of production capacity, and over 200 million kilometers and miles in operation. 6.3 million MEAs produced with 1 gigawatt fuel cell products delivered to date. So we have over 2,300 trucks, over 1,500 transit buses on the road, rail, 10 exciting passenger rail projects, marine and ship deployments, and stationaries, new and up and coming market for Ballard. Next slide, please. So the news flash, if you haven't heard, to be compliant with that Made in America and our growing demands, as I mentioned previously, we have a plant now in Bend, Oregon, and we just received money. Ballard secured over $40 million from the DOE in funding to help build the gigawatt factory for fuel cell deployment in Rockwell, Texas. So we're very excited to get that project on the map. And Ballard also announced recently the $54 million of additional funding to support the gigafactory through the Inflation Reduction Act in Bend, Oregon. That's going to allow Ballard to power over 1,000 fuel cell electric buses. We just announced the announcement with Solaris for over 1,000 fuel cell electric buses in Europe, and that's the biggest order in the company's history to date. So keep your eye on all the exciting announcements coming from Ballard. Sign up on our website to be part of the news that's being circulated and latest updates. Next slide, please. So over the last 3 decades, there's been continuous evolution from 1990, that original fuel cell electric bus, moving through the 2000s to 2010, 2020, and the offering that we have with New Flyer today with the Acceler H2 charge. It's definitely, 30 years of continuous evolution has really put the solidity into the market for fuel cell electric bus deployments. Next slide, please. So the exciting news of the 7 hydrogen hubs being selected with the DOE, Tim and myself, we've been meeting with the different hubs in the different regions, making sure that, the discussion for transit and fuel cell electric buses play a role in those discussions and end use application, and connecting those partners, those fueling partners, to make sure successful deployments occur. So the network of clean hydrogen producers and potential clean hydrogen consumers and connected infrastructure located in close proximity of all those major centers. As you can see here, this is the different level of funding that was awarded. And again, a lot of those line up with the Clean City Coalition and initiatives for larger cities. Next slide, please. So the questions, what's the road map like when you decide, do we go battery electric? We have battery electric, but we need to enhance our fleet to the fuel cell electric bus adoption. It's one, getting comfortable with the bus. Who's your manufacturer? Who do you prefer? Right now we've got the path to market with New Flyer in North America. The fueling infrastructure, understanding becoming comfortable with hydrogen and the terminology, and just understanding and bringing those right players in to help you in that journey, and the maintenance and what that looks like and what that means for the mechanic of the future and the demands for the fleet to keep the buses on the road. Next slide, please. So the funding dialogue, when you sit back and you start looking at where does the money come from to fuel a fuel cell electric bus or a battery electric bus, but today we're here to talk about fuel cell electric buses. Where do I start? Do I work as a transit commission or an organization with the city who also has a climate mitigation plan? What's the region doing for climate initiatives? What at the state level, what are they doing? These are all things you need to think about in the journey to a successful fuel cell electric bus. Many cities over the years, have received infrastructure funding to enhance downtown cores, make that active transportation or accessible transportation. What does that look like? If I choose to go a battery electric bus, is that infrastructure going to be there? And that's where fuel cell electric buses really win. You don't have to worry about that en route charging. You've got the demand and the range that you need with a fuel cell electric bus, and you don't have to impede any of that other capital infrastructure that's been already put in place to make your city appealing and to make it an active transportation community. Make sure you hire the right consultants. When you go and you start those discussions and you launch that initial RFP, investigate and make sure you use the proper wording. And Tim and I are happy to walk you through that in the future. What an RFP or an RFI looks like for a fuel cell electric bus deployment. Make sure you get the technology and the experience behind and the facility, what's required in the facility to change, to adapt to a fuel cell electric bus. So just make sure that you don't rush out to the first consultant. Make sure you get the experience and you have the right terminology in that original RFI. It'll drive your results and actions. Don't look at a plan for 10 years, look at 20, because technology is rapidly advancing. The infrastructure upgrades, again, make sure your planning perimeters and setbacks are in place. Who are the key players? Your fire department. They're right there beside you. They need to have the first responders trained. They can also tap into infrastructure funding, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, but they can tap into infrastructure funding that will allow to help support the infrastructure of the hydrogen fuel cell technology as things advance, because transit is identified as stage 1, stage 2 emergency and management events. So your city planners should be around in those initial discussions, and other commissions that are also in the hub area, or if it's a port or an economic development commission. Make sure those people are around the table when you first bring it to light. Partners, when applying for funding, they'll give you the support letters, employment opportunities that come from hydrogen deployments, and they all contribute to the outcome of a successful project. Next slide, please. So the big planning and the decision making, as I relate back to that last slide, the community revitalization isn't going to be impacted by a fuel cell electric bus deployment. Land use planning impacts, the planning tips, I've put that link in there if you want to research it or hand it off to the city. Limited impact to the existing infrastructure or capital structures. Excellent thought. The limited pedestrian impact in the right of way. Scheduling impacts are minimal. We know how hard it is to get staff right now. the extra demands that are put on the transit operators just because of scheduling and staff resources. And it's a sustainable solution for emergency management scenarios during a stationary power option. It's hard to charge a battery electric bus as we start to see climate events occurring. We want to be sustainable longer. Hydrogen is going to give you that opportunity if you have storage on site. Sorry, next slide. So think about the training and the safety program and the staff development. What does that look like? You know, who are you going to identify as the key technology trainers that you want to invest in to grow that fleet, and then eventually bring the whole, you know, the whole support structure around you. There's lots of tools out there. There's the H2 hydrogen tools and resources. There's first responder training and learning that now is available for fuel cell electric buses and vehicles. The University of Houston has an excellent hydrogen program. The Center for Hydrogen Safety has been a leader all along. The DOE, the Hydrogen for Code officials, make sure that that's available to you and in the staff so that they can scale up with the safety requirements. And that's through the Office of Efficiency and Renewable Energy. There is a training overview there, and various bus associations and specialized working groups are also on board now, delivering solid future. And you're going to have a training program that comes through New Flyer, and Ballard also offers that in the upstream of the purchase agreement. Next slide, please. So I've been researching the last few weeks, and often every week there's something new that comes available for funding, right from the beginning and the concept and the idea to the delivery of the fuel cell electric bus. So there's these links all hyperlink into funding resources. And remember, when you're writing an application, it's about building the case. You may be in the early stages, but you're looking at this end picture and what it looks like. There's multiple stages and partners that are going to get you there. And a lot of these programs and funding allow you to do that. So take some time, go through that. We're going to circulate this in actually a feature sheet as part of the information package at the end of the webinar in the next week. You'll receive this, and feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to connect you with anybody from these departments. And there is a big pool out there. You just got to search out what's right for your community and support it with the right letters of support and partners in the application process. And they're just recommendations to help you in the journey. We're going to talk to Sydney Krueger now. She's the president of Krueger Transit Consulting. I think if you're in transit in the United States, you know, and Sydney, they're definitely, you know, a book of knowledge. She runs Krueger Transit Consulting and Sales Manufacturer Representative for Ballard Power Systems in the U.S. And she's, you know, brought many buses and projects to the market, and great experience behind Sydney. Welcome aboard, Sydney.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim. I'm very excited to be here. I'm really, really excited about Low-No 2024. Next slide, please. So this is, you know, a groundbreaking program. I think thinking back to the days when Low-No was 180 million to now today in 2024, where we're at 1.5 billion for both Low-No and bus facilities together. I think this is such an important year. This is the last 2 years of the 1.5 billion being available per year. So we're just really, really excited that this is a resource from the FTA and that this is available to fund 90% of hydrogen fueling infrastructure and 85% of the fuel cell buses. Once again, Low-No and bus facilities are opening at the same time. The due date is coming up on us, but there is still enough time to write an application and get it submitted. Applications are due April 25th this year, and the award announcement will be no later than July. And then you have 3 years to obligate funds. So even if you're thinking about a project, but your replacement schedule doesn't look like you'll need the buses until 2027 or 2028, you do have until September 30th, 2027 to obligate the funds. We always suggest that you submit your same application twice, once for Low-No, once for bus facilities. Also great to keep in mind for budgetary amount that North County Transit in San Diego was awarded $29 million for their fuel cell program last year. And Santa Cruz Transit was also awarded over 20 million. And we are expecting awards in the range from 5 million all the way up to 30 million. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about our awards across the country. So we know California with their ICT regulation has been kind of leading the charge towards zero emissions and also towards hydrogen. You can see that over 133 million has been awarded to the state of California alone. But if we look across the country and we see New York at 7 million, Michigan at 4, Ohio at 4, Indiana at 7 million, what we know is that this program can be incredibly competitive in California with, I think, the entirety of the 1.5 billion requested by that state alone, but there's so much opportunity across the country and other states as well. So we really do encourage you in any state across the country to apply for Low-No to fund a fuel cell program. Next slide, please. So a couple new aspects to 2024 application. So there has been the addition of a reduction of vehicle customization, which we have seen across the board from the FTA. There has been streamlined tribal application requirements. There's a new requirement along contract terms. And then there is another requirement if you're requesting buses over 20 buses. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through and a little bit of the nitty gritty here to help if you're in the process of writing the application or if you need some strategy and tips on how to be successful in your application to be awarded. So this is the first area here in application basics. So once again, you can submit this for both Low-No and bus facilities. You do have to submit it both times. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at project types. So remember that your government affairs group, or if you have an outside government support staff, can help from top down to get congressional support. I know we all are just leaving the APTA legislative conference to go out and kind of fight for money for your agency. So that's really, really important to have kind of top down support. For project title, what the FTA loves to see is expansion. So if you've already been awarded or already started a hydrogen project, if you're applying for more buses or redundancy to the station, that always looks super attractive. So a title like hydrogen fuel cell bus and hydrogen fueling station expansion is very attractive. In executive summary, to explain that you're seeking funding for how many fuel cell buses you're thinking of and the associated fueling infrastructure, and that you're replacing aging diesel, CNG units, et cetera, that are beyond their useful life. It's also good to mention here that you're doing this because you need a solution for longer operational ranges, for coverage on all your routes, and for operational faster fueling. The growth and that growth will allow your agency to address limitations that we know we've seen from battery technology due to range, and also broaden the portfolio of alternative vehicles. So if you've already gone on your battery journey, it's always good to have a mixed fleet to have extended range by hydrogen. Next slide, please. So in section 3, in demonstration of needs and benefits. So this is very important to talk about, why do you need these buses? Why do you need to clean up the air? Why do you have an unmet need for capital investment? So the buses are being replaced. You go through and you talk about their age, how many miles they have on them, their condition, their performance. You also talk about the condition of the facility, its age, its condition, its TAM score. It's always good to make sure that you reference your long-term fleet management plan and that the project conforms to the FDA's spare ratio guidelines. For Low-No, you do talk about the energy consumption, the reduction in harmful emissions, and the reduction in carbon emissions is obviously the goal of all of this technology. And what is so important is that reduction. So this can either be quantitative, such as CO2 tons avoided, or qualitative, talking about the neighborhoods that will be impacted. And here you can use the FTA's carbon emissions tool. And that is a good way for you to come up with those metrics. You can also talk about your strategy at replacing aging buses, that you're doing it to support the region's air quality and sustainability policies. Yeah, next slide. In terms of local planning and budget. So what we know is that you have to have local funds set aside to do this. I think what's so nice about this program is, like I said earlier, it funds 90% of the infrastructure, 85% of the buses. So it's really a small local amount that you have to come up with, but you do have to set it aside. So you need to highlight here, how is the project consistent with your local and regional long-term planning? Here you can reference your fleet management plan, an ozone advanced action plan, a sustainability plan, a regional transportation plan. Kim was talking about some of these earlier. You can also reference your congressional delegation supports your project, and then attach your letters of support signed by senators and congressmen. And then you can talk about where your local match is coming from. So is it sales tax revenue or other local sources? And you always want to mention that you have a stable, dedicated source of transit funding for local match, and then how it's derived. Next slide, please. So workforce development and project scalability. I think what's so exciting about this with workforce development is we know we have a ton of training to do to train a workforce to move from diesel assets to zero emission fuel cell buses. Ballard can provide a comprehensive training package to support your application. Feel free to reach out to myself, Tim, or Kim for us to prepare that for you. The FTA, of course, has mandated 5% of your application in the total federal fund request go towards training. Yeah, this is, the other piece here is the project scalability. So what we usually like to say is allow the project to answer yes there, and allow the project to either scale down the number of buses from 9 fuel cell buses down to say 5, or maybe take away some of the resiliency or redundancy in the station. So maybe you've applied for double dispenser, double pumps, and you take those away and say, hey, if you could still award us, but you're only able to award us a certain dollar amount, this is the amount that could still allow our project to move forward. So we think that's a good strategic approach to at least begin the funding scenario. Next slide. So a little bit more on our training package. I think this is really, really exciting what Ballard has put together here. And so some of this is based off a training module. So it actually would be an additional module that you would have at your agency that you'd be allowed to tear apart and do diagnostics on. It would also come with a laptop. A second piece is we could also have a teardown module that was more for functional training. So our suggestion here is either 1 or 2 additional modules in your training department that you just use for training staff. It also comes with special tools, a portable leak tester, a high voltage interface box, and then an electrical system learning board, and a lot of other pieces here. There's also augmented reality or virtual reality that comes with this system. And then of course, Ballard does provide, which Kim talked about earlier, on-site technical training for tiers 1, 2, and 3. And then the third piece there is that we do recommend that you come to Ballard for that level 3 training. Next slide. In terms of implementation strategy and timeline. So we talked about this a bit earlier, Kim did, on partners, but partners and building a successful team, I think, is huge in the successful deployment of your project. So making sure you're building the partners with your O&M, with the industrial gas company that you're using for infrastructure, with facility mods partner, with a project management consultant. So you want to go through how many buses you're deploying, what kind of station you're building. Is it a liquid mobile fueler, which has been really attractive recently? Are you doing electrolysis? How will the funds be obligated upon execution of the grant? And then talk about the lead time. So we've seen lead times anywhere from 18 to 25 months, and that the vehicles will qualify for categorical exclusion. And then you go through with the timeline too. So I gave you an idea of a sample timeline here, which could be used for your application, but everything through kickoff meeting, through contracting, and through commissioning of the buses. Next slide. Partnership provision and technical, legal, financial capacity. So I think what's so unique about this grant that I think we love to take advantage of at KTC is that it does not require you to go through a 6-month to year process of writing RFPs, going through with award, and then going through with contracting. From that point, you are able to list partners that then can be sole sourced. And this does meet, it essentially allows you to not have to go through a competitive bidding process. So Ballard is happy to be written in as a partner. KTC is happy to be written in as a partner. So you can go through and say, we're partnering with New Flyer of America, Gillig, Air Liquide, Krueger Transit Consulting, and others for this project. Include a paragraph on each partner. The stronger the team, the stronger the application. And then, of course, technical, legal, financial capacity. So just explaining that you do have the know-how to carry out this project. Next slide. Procurement methods and contracting. So I think what's great here is OEMs are looking at the levels of customization on your previous builds, and they will help to generate standardization from the last build. So we will explain that language in the grant. We will also provide a letter of support that explains that. So to make sure to ask your OEM of choice for this letter and include that language in your application. If you're writing a joint spec, that is great. And also explain that you're utilizing potentially state procurement contracts that are authorized under the FAST Act. Next slide. For climate change and emissions reductions, here, additional consideration sections support several executive orders that involve climate change, environmental justice, racial equality, quality jobs, and workforce engagement. So you only need to do for bus on this side if you're applying for over 20 buses. Next slide. For full fleet transition, workforce transition. So explain how your agency has a goal to get to 100% zero emission fleet by what date. Explain how the project would increase your ZEB percentage from what to what percentage. And then an idea here is to explain how you'll develop apprenticeship program. That's something that the FTA has been asking for and encouraging. So looking at potentially a 4-year program with apprentice mechanics to pass 2 training classes per year, pass evaluations by maintenance is conducted every 6 months. So that is a great idea to make your application attractive. Next slide. For job creation. So this is explaining how moving to ZEB will require training employees to keep pace and changing technologies. So here you can talk once again about how you're providing operational training for bus operators, mechanics, and other employees. It also asks the same thing for facilities. So if you're working with someone like Trillium, Lindy, Air Liquide, you can ask this the same question and fill in information about apprenticeships that they put together for the facility side. Next slide. Justice 40. So I think what we always want to see is that we're deploying buses in areas that need clean air the most. So Justice 40 zones, disadvantaged community. The FTA wants to see that that is our priority to clean up the air first. So you're always scored higher if we can deploy in these zones. So you can make sure to use different screens and the CEJST screen to look at where you're deploying and that you meet these guidelines. Next slide. For your zero emission transition plan. So I know this can be a little bit daunting for some agencies that are not yet required to put this into place. California, if you look under the ICT plan, has a tons of samples of these put together that you could use as a sample base. But essentially, you're looking to answer these 6 questions. So I know for some agencies across the country, they hadn't yet done the plan, but they did put together a plan for Lono and were still successful in their application. So I think don't be scared of this. Put this together. If you need consultant assistance to do this, that can be provided. But plans can be as short as 2 pages. So for faster internal approval, simple is better. Next slide. Wanted to give you an idea of a budget. I think this can be helpful in making sure that you're not missing anything in your program. So I put together a sample budget for a 9-bus project with a 50-bus liquid hydrogen fueling station, really capable of scaling up to 100 buses with an additional of 150,000. So the way that hydrogen infrastructure scales is incredible. But here you can look at facility modifications for about 1.7, the 40-foot hydrogen fuel cell buses at anywhere from 1.4 to 1.8 per bus, utility upgrades in case you need them. You might not with a hydrogen program, considering we need 10 times less power than a battery deployment. Project management, hydrogen liquid fueling station design build at about 6.5 million for 50 buses. And then training at that 5% where Ballard can help partner with that. So this was a total request of 21 million. The other piece that we also had put in here that was interesting to add is a lease of a hydrogen mobile fueler for 6 months. We've seen some projects across the country deploy, but the infrastructure is delayed behind the bus deployment. So we're seeing that the infrastructure needs another 6 months to come through. So adding in a lease of a 6-month gaseous mobile fueler for $700,000 is an extremely smart idea that we've been encouraging this round. Once again, Ballard can supply letters of support here, and KTC could help with project management of the station. Next slide, please. Some more links like what Kim supplied earlier in terms of the application, the supplemental form. Ballard and KTC will partner with you to help you write this. I know it can be overwhelming and it's hard to know exactly what to write in here to make it competitive. I think keep in mind you can deploy a battery and hydrogen joint program. Delaware was successful at that. If you need help, feel free to reach out. There still is enough time for us to partner with you and submit a hydrogen low-no application. Next slide. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Next, I'd like to further our knowledge on grant funding success, but it's going to be with RTC Reno, and James Gees here. He's the Director of Public Transit and Operations at the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe. And he said I should call him Jim. So Jim, the next couple minutes is yours.
Thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone. Next slide, we'll just jump right in. My name is Jim Gee. I'm the Director of Public Transit for RTC Washoe in beautiful Reno, Nevada. We are a small to medium-sized transit system with 65 buses, so a fairly small fleet. But we do have 2 high-frequency BRT routes, provide about 15,000 passenger trips per day, and have a long history of innovation in our system. Like other systems, we provide paratransit, flex ride, have a very, very large van pool program, and have a lot of experiences in different types of fuel. We're unique, it's almost unique, I should say, in that we are the MPO, the Transit Authority, and the Regional Road Builder all under one umbrella. So that makes us pretty nimble at times when it comes to looking for funding and getting projects developed and on the street. Next slide. So fortunately for us here in Reno, we've had a long history of leveraging federal dollars, having a culture of innovation, and really trying different modes of transportation. We were an early adopter of battery electric buses, with our first Proterras being received in 2014, so now 10 years old. And so over time, we've seen sort of the history of battery electric with the different generations. Next slide. And that has really pushed us to really thinking about hydrogen as a complement to our fleet. With our battery electric buses, we have to basically plan for about 100 miles range per bus. And so a third of our fleet is about as high as we can go without moving into a situation where it's more than a one-to-one vehicle replacement as compared to our regular hybrid buses. What that means essentially, as we develop our schedules, not only do we have to think about the range of the vehicle, we have to think about, is it a hill route or a non-hill route? We have to think about the distance of the route, and ultimately we start creating schedules that are designed for the buses as opposed to designed for our drivers or designed especially for our passengers. And so that really pushed us into thinking about different modes of transportation. Other things that attracted us to hydrogen were the scalability, and that with hydrogen, a lot of your cost is up front as compared to battery electric, when you have to always think about, how do I charge the vehicle? Do I have the power necessary to do that? And of course, the fueling time, and that instead of having to plug it in overnight or charge it on the street, hydrogen acts more like a traditional transit bus. You bring it back to the garage, you fuel it for 10 minutes, and you move on to the next vehicle. Next slide. So we at RTC, even though we're a small system, we are the fortunate recipients of 2 low-no grants related to hydrogen. We went 2 for 2. Our first grant was 6.8 million, and that was for an initial order of 2 buses and then fueling infrastructure of up to 10 vehicles. With a follow-up grant received in 2023, that would add 6 vehicles, further fueling expansion, a virtual reality training program that Sydney talked about earlier, that is also modeled upon a program done by AC Transit, and that second grant was for 8.8 million. I'd note one wrinkle for us is we have to locate these hydrogen vehicles at our paratransit facility because our fixed route facility, which is the photo to the right, is underneath an interstate. And so we're not allowed to have CNG or hydrogen underneath the interstate for our fixed route facility. Next slide. So I just want to touch upon some of the application tips that we've used in our successful applications that are above and beyond what FTA spells out in terms of what they're looking for, such as Justice 40 and workforce development. For our applications, we really focused on our previous success and making sure that we were stressing the FTA, that we were a good use of tax dollars, that we were essentially a sure bet, that if you give us federal dollars, we have a long track record of leveraging those dollars, coming in under budget, putting projects on the street, and so that there was a comfort level with FTA in giving us those dollars. Next, we also, in terms of the application development process, asked for help. We had Sydney and her group at KTC under contract. She has been absolutely remarkable and a great resource, not only in terms of the application development, but after the fact in terms of just helping us get hydrogen up and running. Ballard also has been a great resource, along with just your other friends in the transit system. You know, there are a lot of systems who have long-term experience with hydrogen, such as Canton, Ohio, and Palm Springs, California, and AC Transit in Oakland. And those folks have also been really helpful in terms of providing advice and how we can get our hydrogen system up and running. We also made a business case. In our case, we had the long history of battery and electric, and we knew the benefits of it, but we also knew at the same time the limitations. And so we were able to build a business case around those limitations, and especially in terms of range and how hydrogen would be a better fit for certain trips in our community. Next, we stressed that we had done our homework and that this was not going to be a pilot. And in fact, I had an FTA staffer tell me once, we don't fund pilots, we fund commitments. And so we wanted to stress that this was not a one-off hydrogen purchase. This was a commitment to our fleet moving forward, that we were going to try this new method of fuel, but not just try with it, we were just going to stick with it. As Sydney mentioned, lining your partners up early is a great piece of advice. For us, we had Sydney and her group and Ballard and our vehicle manufacturer, our fueling infrastructure provider, and our fueler all lined up as a part of the initial application. That made it really easy to demonstrate that we had a great team. And then throughout the process of the writing the application, we had a lot of eyeballs on the application itself. And then we also made sure that our congressional delegation was aware of the application, our local mayors and city councils were aware of the application, and then we were prepared after the fact to get FTA's review on, if we weren't successful, what could we have done better in terms of the application to make it a stronger thing. So next slide. Where we at today is we have our first vehicles here in Reno. We're in the process of temporary fueling with a fueling facility to be up and running later this year. For us, we really see hydrogen and traditional battery electric being sort of a mix of our fleet, with that battery electric being a third and hydrogen, you know, probably becoming that other 2/3. And so with that, I will wrap up really quickly and answer any questions that I think Kim has for me.
Thank you, Jim. That was an amazing presentation. And congratulations. You know, when you said the word commitment, I wrote a lot of grants in my career in municipal government, and I think the word was sustainable. What's your project going to look like, and how are you going to make it sustainable throughout the life cycle and past, the funding support? So, one of the questions I had for you is, what are the steps for successful onboarding your staff when it comes to selling the mode of propulsion that they have very little prior experience of? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on the level of staff and the type of staff. For example, on the maintenance side, the folks who are turning the wrenches, doing the inspections and so on. In that case, we found a champion in our maintenance department who was willing to basically promote internally with the other mechanics, how this made a lot of sense. We also had to have a lot of homework done so we could sell it internally to our financial folks. You look at the price of hydrogen and a concern about the price of hydrogen, we were able to demonstrate, hey, it's a pretty stable fuel cost, and there's not much to worry about. We had to sell it to our boards, who there's a lot of just misinformation out there about hydrogen, and so doing your homework, getting your research done, and we actually had talking points around hydrogen that we could tell a city council person or tell a supervisor in the garage. That we could basically demonstrate that this is not a one-off thing. This is not a sort of a temporary solution. This is a real commitment that other folks have done that makes a lot of sense, that it's a growing industry, and that we're basically have a great reason for going along with this process.
Good for you, Jim, because those internal champions really are the people that are going to stick through the project and encourage the other staff. And, the other staff are going to watch, and they're going to want to be part of it when they see the excitement. And I think secondly, it's the education. A lot of projects I rolled out in the past, nervous fear, but if you educate your council and your boards, and that's what it comes down to is simply education to get the buy-in. Very good. Good for you. When applying for funding, what is the biggest hurdle to allocating the operational plan? I think you sort of answered that, but I just want to revisit it. What's that forecast look like? Because we're seeing technology, the more and more rapidly it's changing, the more deployments, it's becoming more competitive. Well, what was your biggest challenge there, hurdle?
We had two challenges. One is sort of educating our folks internally on the difference between the upfront cost versus the ongoing cost. We were used to battery electric, which has a fairly low upfront cost, but every time you buy a vehicle, you have to buy a charger. You have to make sure that charging infrastructure is in place, and you have to look at the price of electricity and the amount of power that you're using. And so hydrogen vehicles are a totally different model. It's more like a traditional diesel vehicle in that you buy a fueling station, but that fueling station could do 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever buses there is. So, just a lot of it's education and making sure that they understood the difference between the upfront cost versus the ongoing cost. We also had to make sure there was a comfort level in the price of hydrogen fuel and how it, what that price had looked like over time and how it's expected to change in the future. And that it's not really a volatile price so much as it's fairly stable. And so, once we got those concerns addressed, we were able to allocate the funds to move forward.
Very good. Now, the next one is, I had a 3-part question here, but I'm going to sort of circle back on this one, Jim, if you're comfortable in answering it. When applying for that fueling infrastructure and the funds to support that infrastructure, we're now seeing technology where stationary power systems can now, in the next 2 to 3 years, they could act actually as critical backup energy systems for command centers at municipalities or emergency management centers. So that enhances the support in the future for that infrastructure. But what was the critical thing to consider for you when you were looking at that initial bus deployment for the funding infrastructure and the fueling infrastructure?
So our most critical things to consider when we were looking at the fueling infrastructure side and really the project in general. A couple of them I've already touched about. One is making sure we did our homework to make sure that there was a comfort level internally. Secondly, making sure we had buy-in from all levels of the organization, from the mechanic up to the CEO. And third, making sure that we were prepared for delays. Because when we put our application in 2 or 3 years ago, we had a time schedule that had the vehicles and the fueling infrastructure and the fueling facility all up and running at the same time. And of course, plans change, and so supply chain issues happen, things get delayed, and so we needed to be sort of prepared to work on the fly sometimes. In our case, we had a generator that we needed to do for the fueling infrastructure that had a 9-month lead time, and so we had to work around that, and that was unexpected when that application went in. So I think as we look at our ongoing process, a little bit of improvisation helps, but just being able to be nimble and working with our partners, with KTC and Ballard and our other fueling partners, to make sure that we continue to keep moving.
You mentioned this before. You had an internal champion, and I just got off a call actually with an operations management group with one of the transit committees I sit on. But what works best for staff training and support when applying for funding? Do you pick a small group, or do you look at the group as a whole? What worked best for you?
Well, for us, we had a sort of, and again, we modeled it upon our electric bus program, where we had 1 or 2 mechanics that were subject matter experts, and they were the initial go-to people when we had difficulties with those vehicles. And then we had a support group of maintenance folks who were also properly trained and ready to help out. So I guess it's a hybrid mix between the 2 choices you gave, Kim. But our subject matter experts, they become the front line in terms of they're the first folks you go to. But again, we have a lot of back support for those.
Excellent. So what was it like when that first bus showed up? What did you do? You got the go ahead. First, you got the funding, you got the announcement, and wow, what's next? What's the fundamental steps that got you there quickly?
Well, it was exciting. I mean, because we had educated folks all along the process, they were excited to see the new vehicle, excited to see the new technology, there's sometimes cases where you get some naysayers who would say, like hydrogen, oh boy. But we really didn't have any of that. We had excitement around, hey, we are a leading transit system, and this is a leading edge technology, and you should be excited to be a part of this process. And they were, which was great.
Well, good for you. Excellent presentation, Jim, and thank you again for doing this for us. And I think the participants today have taken a lot of information away, and thank you again. That's good. Funding, consulting, finding the right funding mechanisms, choosing the right consultants and information resources. We've got Tim Sasseen, the Market Development Director for Ballard Power Systems. Tim's been a long time lifer with Ballard, and if there's anybody that's in the fuel cell business in North America, they know who Tim is. So Tim, the next few minutes is yours.
Thanks a lot. Here for life and here to prove it. Really, really happy to be here today. I'm going to go quickly through this. Again, links. You want links, you want information, check out this slide deck. Here's a bunch for U.S. funding sources above and beyond. Also for fuel cell bus information, the California Hydrogen Business Council has an excellent Better Electric Bus website. Do check that out. Tons of fuel cell bus information on there, including some of these links. NREL's got a bunch of stuff. As well as the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance. Please check them out for state-by-state policy. Desire by the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. This thing has a comprehensive database of funding. Check it out for sure. And CalSTART out of California. They have a funding finder tool that goes beyond California. Lots of great resources out there if you know where to look. Money's there to be had. Next slide, please. make sure you realize what hydrogen is all about. Education is all about it. As you're looking for those internal champions, get them on board with what hydrogen does. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. So once you have that hydrogen, just like once you have that electricity, everything's zero emissions after that. The story of emissions is before that. So you could start with wind, solar, or geothermal, put it on the grid and charge up your battery bus, no emissions. You could use that wind, solar, geothermal, use an electrolyzer, make hydrogen, put it into your fuel cell bus, zero emissions. By the same token, you could use renewable natural gas or some methane and put it into a thermal power plant, power your battery electric bus, or reform it into hydrogen power your fuel cell electric bus. Once it's an electron, once it's hydrogen, it's zero emissions. It's all about that choice of what happens at the source. So if you think about how these two technologies are going to end up, is it a race? Is it going to be battery buses or fuel cell buses in the end? Is this a VHS versus Betamax situation? No, it's actually more of a solar power and wind power situation where the two really accent each other. Battery for those short power bursts and fuel cells for those long energy duration applications. It's kind of like we still use diesel and gasoline. We're still going to need hydrogen and grid power to carry us through and really hit all those different applications. Next slide, please. Hydrogen Fuel Cell Bus Council, I really can't say enough about what these guys do. Carl Gannett out of Champaign-Urbana helped start this thing, and they're getting very involved in policy that's specific about hydrogen fuel cell buses for zero emissions. Do reach out to them, get information from them. They'll be following things like the 45V hydrogen tax credit that right now is still being decided. Something's going to happen. We're going to have a very generous tax credit from the federal government for hydrogen, but it's either going to be very specific where only the cleanest hydrogen gets subsidized and we wait for that to slowly grow, or we're going to subsidize a wide range of hydrogen technologies and incentivize that carbon intensity to reduce. That's really the debate that's going on right now. But either way, we've got a lot of people at the gate ready to make big hydrogen projects and to make deals for you. If you happen to be in one of those hydrogen hubs, pay attention because they're going to be looking for off-takers. They really want transit to soak up this hydrogen. They're going to be obligated to make lots and lots of hydrogen at zero carbon and low price. They're looking for off-takers. So if you're not involved in a hydrogen hub and you're in one of those zones, get involved. Or even if you're near one, they're going to be looking for off-takers. So just keep your radar open. The fuel situation is going to be continuing to improve both for availability and for cost. And the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Bus Council is a great resource for keeping track of those policy issues. Next slide. That's it for me.
Wow, what a great webinar. This is the third in a series of 3. We did it, Tim, and those resources for the webinars are going to be online. We're going to send them out to everybody that registered here today. We're going to circulate all the information within the week. And our contacts are going to be available as well. Now, we've got questions and answers that have come up, Tim. I think we've addressed all of them online. If there's any questions after the webinar, please, here's our contacts. It's going to be available. Like I said, it's going to be circulated. Please reach out. You've got a deadline quickly approaching, but Sydney's here to help. We've got great expertise, that have been on different webinars. We've got Jim, we've got Kurt Conrad that's participated. There's just so many resources out there to support the fuel cell electric bus journey. Anything else you want to say, Tim, before we wrap up?
Last chance for anyone to type in those questions, but thanks everyone for joining and for paying attention. This is a huge year for fuel cell electric buses. We expect to see an even greater proportion of awards. And again, we're going to have funding beyond LONO. I was just talking with representatives from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations out of the Department of Energy. They have $750 million they need to spend in these hydrogen hubs on end uses. And they heard that transit is really happening in hydrogen. So they're very interested in hearing about hydrogen. I told them, and hopefully they'll take that up, that we need something beyond LONO. This is the fourth of 5 years of big LONO funding, $1 billion LONO funding. Next year's the last year that we're guaranteed that $1 billion plus. So we're looking for funding that can continue that. And it may be through the OCED, they can provide that funding, at least through the hydrogen hubs for those transit agencies lucky enough to be in there. So we're looking to see more federal funding for transit above and beyond LONO.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, we got a question if you can't make the deadline by April 25th, there is a lot of other programs like Kim and Tim talked about. So the CFI program, programs like TIRCP that are coming out in California with over $1 billion in it, tons of money like Tim mentioned from the DOE, but it's not too late for this round of Low-No. So if you're interested, if you need help, feel free to reach out to myself or Tim. We're happy to partner with you. We're happy to partner with you to help you with the application. Also, please reach out for letters of support. Happy to provide one and show that you have a strong team and a strong application. So still, you know, days left here before you need to submit, but really, really excited about this round. And what we've heard from the feds is that they want to see more hydrogen applications. They will award a percentage to hydrogen based off how many applications they receive to battery. So we're really on a quest to educate agencies how to complete an application. We know it's more complicated than it is for battery, but there's so many experts out there. Our group is happy to help. Ballard is happy to help. Jim and at Washoe is happy to help with what they've done. So feel free to reach out, and good luck in submitting your applications, and we hope everyone's successful.
And that deadline's fast approaching, isn't it, Sydney? Sydney, it's on the 25th of April. So, and it's got to be in before midnight. So absolutely a lot of work for a lot of people.
Wanted to shout out to Don Curry out there in Oceanside, California at North County Transit District. Hydrogen capacity in the United States. We're going to work to put together something that can show where we're at today with hydrogen production and availability. It's tricky because there's kind of a mix of information between what's being proposed and what's actually producing molecules right now. But we know some plants, like the new plug power plants, are starting to come online. So we're going to do our best to get that information out and send it out to the people that we have registered for this webinar. Thanks for asking.
And also the hubs, right? So the hubs are the answer to creating more hydrogen capacity in the United States. And it's why that $8 billion came out. I think it's good to note you don't have to be in one of the states that was awarded a hub to deploy a hydrogen program, because we do have infrastructure already built across the US. But that is the answer, Don. And we've met with the governor's business office in California that we can connect you with, and just kind of continue those conversations to make sure that industrial gas companies know when you're scaling up how much molecule you need, and that the plants and they're aligned to provide you with that molecule.
Excellent answers. And I think we're just wrapping up here at the top of the hour. We've got 3 minutes left. If there's anybody else has any questions, please populate those questions. If not, we're going to respond to them if you don't get them in, or if you have to take away and think about what you want to send us, we'll definitely answer that over the next week. But again, reach out to Sydney Krueger. She's the president of Krueger Transit Consulting. She's the sales rep for Ballard in the United States, and she also can help you with your journey through the application process. She's available, and her contacts there. Her email is sydney@ktc-consulting.com. Reach out to Tim, who's the Director of Market Development for Public Relations in North America. Myself, Market Development Manager for North America. I work with Tim. And James, thank you again, James, for being part of this webinar here today. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.